Okay, back with Christian Thibaudeau, one of the best strength coaches in the business. And whenever I have ideas on my mind, whenever I'm thinking about training, whether something's effective or something's ineffective, you're always the first guy I think about contacting because you're very good at cutting through nonsense and not getting distracted by hype. And I think you've always been like that the whole time I've known you. I've known you since 2002, I believe. I think we both got into the business around the same time, or at least our online presences developed around the same time. So that's one thing I appreciate about you. And a couple of topics we're going to get into today is we're going to talk about the pros and cons of training to failure, in particular, Mike Mentzer's heavy duty system on that. And then we're going to get into pros and cons of static holds. Is that something worth playing around with? How about deliberate reps, where instead of trying to be explosive on everything, you purposely do more purposeful or deliberate repetitions? And then get into the hype around branched chain aminos and also essential amino acids, because they've been hyped for a long time, but even though data has come out that they're not effective, they're still being pushed and people still take them regularly. So we'll get into that. And then I wanted to end on what do you think the influence of Instagram in particular has been on training progress? Are people better off having access to all of this information where you're just seeing thousands of people posting their workouts every day and giving training advice? So let's start with the training to failure. What is your take on that? Do you think it has merit?
Well, it's a context thing, right? Like, first of all, I want to mention that, like, as far as Mike Mentzer is going, he is probably my ideal physique. Even when I was growing up, I idolized Mike Mentzer because he looks like a bodybuilder, but like someone who can just like move weight. Like, that guy could probably walk through a brick wall. Like, he didn't have like that tiny waist, like thick waist, big forearms, big traps. It wasn't like super wide. He just like a powerful look. So I always love Mike Mentzer. Is the physique that I appreciate the most.
I think that's why people keep coming back to Mike Mentzer, because you look at a heavy duty book, one of his books, and there's just a lot of pictures of him in his prime when he was competing in bodybuilding. And you're like, man, that is the perfect physique. Everything is proportionate. He doesn't have the bubble gut that you see in a lot of bodybuilders now. It's very aesthetic, but he was also crazy strong. So he just embodied really everything you wanted in physique development.
His brother Ray was even stronger.
Yeah,
even stronger. I mean, he did partial squats, like partial being slightly above parallel with 900 pounds, like just crazy strong. Now, when it comes to like the question you asked, well, first, I think that the latest iteration of Mentzer's system, heavy duty, and the later evolution of heavy duty, in my mind, it was a step in the wrong direction. As far as Mike methods were concerned, I believe that his earlier work, when he actually built his physique, was much closer to the truth. People look at heavy duty, those theories were developed way past his prime, and when he was actually not training anymore or barely training anymore, and mostly training clients at Gold Gym. But his physique was built, to be fair, on much lower volume of work than guys like Arnold and stuff like that. In part because he was doing so much aerobic work to get lean. That's something that people don't know about Mike, is that he was like very muscular, could put on muscle very easily, but it was really hard for him to get contest lean. So he would walk 2 or 3 hours a day. He would bike maybe an hour a day. So that left him with, and he was writing articles. He was like working a lot. So maybe his training style was in part because of lack of energy, lack of time. But regardless of the reason, it actually worked pretty darn well. I mean, and the original HIT, like from Arthur Jones and Ellington Darden, these guys, that was real high intensity training, and it worked very well. Okay, the later iteration, like the heavy duty, where you are training like once every 14 days or something like that. I mean, that's pushing it. That's pushing a good idea too far.
Yeah.
Because I believe that, I mean, you can progress by adding volume gradually. It is one mean of progression. But I don't think it's sustainable for the natural individual for a long time. I would still include periods where you have higher volumes of work. But generally speaking, if you're natural, you should probably aim for a slightly lower volume than what is normally considered normal for bodybuilding purposes, which entails that you have to train a little bit harder on those sets. because you can get very similar results from fairly high volume while keeping a few reps in the tank, or doing way fewer sets but pushing them hard to the limit. For example, I mean, the modern understanding of how hypertrophy work is that it's really once a repetition. And that would actually be a good introduction to your question about the slow, deliberate tempos. I will get back to that at that point. But you need for a rep to be maximally effective for hypertrophy, you need to reach a point where you can't move the weight fast anymore. Even if you're trying to, the weight just becomes too heavy relative to your fatigue level. Now it starts to move slower and slower and slower. And that's one of the two conditions for a rep to be effective for growth. The other one is recruiting the fast twitch muscle fibers. So for example, if I go slow on purpose with a light weight, I do have a high amount of tension because of the slow speed, which is one of the conditions, but I'm not producing a high amount of force because I'm using a lightweight move slow. So I don't recruit the fast twitch fibers. So I'm lacking one of the conditions. I'm not saying that slow deliberate reps are not effective. We'll get back to that. But just to get back to the point is that if you take a set to failure, okay, regardless of the condition you're doing your set in, like fast rep, slow rep, whatever, only the last 5 reps will be effective at promoting growth. Because these are the reps where you have enough fatigue so that now, even if you're trying, you're moving somewhat slow and slower on every rep. But the level of effort required is so high that you need those fast twitch fibers. Now you have all these conditions. Now, if I stop 2 reps short of failure, that means my set gave me 3 reps that give me growth. If I go to failure, it's 5. Okay. So does that mean that the not failure approach doesn't work? No, it doesn't, because you can compensate by doing one more set, for example. So that's why doing volume can work, but it costs more energy. It takes longer. It releases more cortisol, which might be a bad thing, especially in people with already elevated cortisol levels, for example. So in that case, the closer you get to failure, the less sets you need to do to get the number of reps to stimulate growth, which would be the ideal would be like 20 to 25 per muscle in a session, for example. So if you go to failure, you need 5 sets for a muscle, or 4 to 5. If you stop 1 rep short, then you need probably more like 2 or 3 more sets. But if you stop 4 reps short of failure, then you need to do way too many sets to compensate. See what I mean? So it's not that failure is necessary. You can grow fine not going to failure, but not too far away from failure. And it doesn't mean that failure is bad, because it can be more draining on the nervous system. It's just a matter if you go to failure, it's done with the purpose of having to do less set to promote growth. If you go high volume and to failure, then you're going to run into problems.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest problems with going to failure is that people's technique goes down the drain as they get closer to that last rep. So for example, they're doing 8 reps, it's pretty clean, 9 is starting to get a little sloppy, and then 10 is unrecognizable compared to how the first 5 looked. And I think that's why a lot of people who like training to failure tend to gravitate towards machines, at least if they've been doing it for a long time. Because at least there you're just stuck in certain planes. Now all you have to focus on is moving the weight from point A to point B.
That's exactly right. I mean, and I will go one step further. I mean, we have several levels of failure, okay? Because what I just mentioned is the theoretical muscle failure, or I would call it personally movement failure. You just can't move the weight anymore, right? But you have several levels that could be seen as failure. The first level would be failure of intent. And that's mostly in beginners or people who don't have much experience with training, don't have a high pain threshold, is that once you reach a certain level of discomfort, you will actually create immediate central nervous system fatigue, and it just kills your will to train, and you actually hit failure. But not because you can't do any more reps, because you just create that central fatigue that prevented you from sending that strong excitatory drive to the muscle. Well, one thing that people need to understand, central fatigue, which drives how strong a nerve impulse you send to the muscle, is highly influenced by feelings of discomfort, pain, and stuff like that, because all of that is information like discomfort, pain, it hurts, it's swelled, it's hard effort, the muscle will send that information to the brain. And the brain interprets that as, well, I'm about to die or something, and it basically inhibits further force production. Okay, so people with more experience, that failure of intent normally doesn't happen. But people with low experience, it will happen. So that's why someone who's more of a beginner, like training to failure, is actually not true failure. Then the second level will be tension failure, and you see that more on machine exercises, isolation movements, where you lose the feeling of a muscle. You can still move the weight, and externally speaking, technique still looks decent. But for some reason, you just don't feel the muscle that you're targeting doing the work anymore. Like you might feel your biceps really good for 8 reps. Then on rep number 9, it's like I lost the sensation. I feel it in my joints, I feel it in my forearms, but no more in the biceps. Okay. One could argue, well, what's the point of continuing? Because the muscle I'm trying to grow is obviously not producing maximum tension anymore. Okay. And then you have, as you mentioned, the technical failure, which happens mostly on compound movement when you have a technique shift. And that's basically the same thing. The main muscle might be too fatigued, so you have to change position subconsciously to put another muscle in a good lever position to compensate. So one would argue that with big compound movements, I would never go to failure. Right. In fact, I don't want to go to technical failure. On machines, it's much safer, much better.
Right.
So it's really a context thing. So and once you understand that if you stop 1 rep short of failure, you really only have to do 1 more set to get the exact same growth as if, for example, 2 sets to failure, you go 3 sets, 1 rep short, you get the same number of effective reps. So the same growth. Right. And I would argue that on the big compound movements, it's a lot more effective to stop 1, maybe even 2 reps short, but add 1 or 2 more sets.
Right.
So you get more technical practice anyway, and you get the same result. Whereas on machines, I would argue that it's probably better to go to closer proximity to failure, but do less sets.
Right. I find combinations of the 2 theories you're talking about can be effective. So for example, instead of doing 1 all-out set to failure, such as you do your warm-up sets and then 1 all-out set, I'll do 3 working sets with the same weight. The first 2 sets stay maybe 2-3 reps away from failure. The last one, you push it to that last quality rep. I'm not even sure I would say it's true failure, because I guess true failure would be you keep going until you actually can't do another rep, meaning that you try to do number 10, but it doesn't go. So then you put it down and stop.
Right. I think that people should never go to that point.
Yeah,
I mean, if you're experienced, you know when you have 1 more rep left in you.
Yeah,
like
that's true.
Most of the time.
Absolutely.
So you can get to that point, but I would not go to the point where, okay, there is like a 50-50 chance that I might not get this rep, because failing to get a rep is what will cause the greatest, by far, amount of central fatigue. And why it's important, because the central fatigue will linger for a while and will make everything else you do in that session less effective. Right. Because if you understand that central fatigue means a weakened excitatory drive to the muscle, it means that once you have a high level of central fatigue, anything you do past that point, you will be really bad at recruiting the fast twitch fibers, which require a very strong nerve impulse. So even if you hit failure on those subsequent sets, you're not hitting failure while hitting the fast twitch fibers. So you're not promoting growth.
Right. I think it's interesting what you said about how Mike's heavy duty system evolved over the years, because in his later work, it started becoming 1 set to failure. I think you would only do 2 to 4 moves total.
Right.
Not in one workout, but just 2 to 4 moves total in a program. So over the course of a week, you may do 4 different moves. Right. But if you did deadlifts on Monday, you wouldn't just do it again the next Monday. You would do it the Monday after that. Definitely. And I played around with that program, and I never made any progress with that much time in between a set. In fact, I feel that you don't get good at the skill of training when you do it that infrequently, because I would do heavy deadlifts on a Monday, and then 2 weeks later I come back in, everything would feel heavy. And I would come in excited going, yeah, I feel fresh. I bet I'm going to add 50 pounds to my deadlift. And then I'm doing my warm-ups and I feel out of sync. I feel out of the pocket. and I would either only be able to do what I did last time, and that would be more of the best case scenario. A lot of times you wouldn't be able to do that. You actually regressed. So I think that's where he took it too far. And it reminds me of when the power factor training. Remember that program, power factor training with Cisco?
Yeah, like 2 inch reps.
Yeah. So Tony Robbins got behind that for a while, and it was part of one of his offerings. So you would hear these motivational audio tapes, and then there would be a bonus videotape of power factor training. And he looked at this system as a way to get superior results in the gym, doing very short ranges of motion with very heavy weights and doing it infrequently. And during the interview between Tony and these guys, he goes, okay, this is great. So basically a workout's going to become something where it's like a haircut. You get it done every 2 weeks. And I remember that in my mind going, this is great marketing because this is exactly what people want to hear. Oh, great. I only have to go to the gym once every 2 weeks and I'm going to get superior results. And then, so right there, there's already something wrong with that because there are so many benefits of training beyond just physique augmentation and the ability to lift more weights. For me, dealing with lifelong depression, training really keeps my mental health on track, especially when everything else feels chaotic. If I can just be regular with my workouts, it really helps keep my mental health on track. So if I did it every 2 weeks, my mental health's going to take a hit, and then my mental health's going to take an even bigger hit because now I'm making less progress. I'm getting weaker. It's demoralizing.
Yeah, and really, basically, you are giving the advice to train less to people who don't want to train because that's for the people that were attracted. I don't want to train a lot, so I'm going to train less and less. But these people already don't want to be in the gym. So if you have 14 days or 7 days, whatever, between workouts, well, what's aiding like waiting one more day to train, or let's wait 9 days or 10 days, and before you know it, you're not training anymore because it's a lot easier to drop that one workout per week than if you're training 4 days a week and it's part of your routine or even daily. I mean, you should use your body in some form of function every day. It doesn't have to be hard training, but it needs to be trained. And to get back to your point about deadlifting, what people, and we've mentioned this in previous podcasts, I mean, the big basic lifts should be trained. It's a skill. It's not just strength, it's strength skill. You can actually have stronger muscle today than last week, but be weaker on deadlift just because your intramuscular coordination or intermuscular coordination is worse. Your technique might be just very slightly off, doesn't take a lot. I mean, even like that's why Olympic weightlifters, they snatch and clean and jerk pretty much every day because even them who are highly skilled, if they skip a week, they lose their timing.
Yeah.
So if you are really interested in being strong, you need frequency because it's practicing your skill.
And I think that's where people get distracted with magical transfer type concepts. And what I mean by that is, for example, back in 2018, I tried that small lift squat program for the first time. And my squat definitely went way up at the end of it. But I didn't do any deadlifts during that because that's what everyone recommended. They say, don't worry about the deadlift. Your deadlift will be stronger by the time you come back after focusing on the squat. And you already know where I'm going with this. After I finished this program, I couldn't weight the deadlift. I was like, wow, my squat is so much better. I've never squatted this much before. I couldn't even break 5 plates off the floor. And I was doing that for reps before the small off. I go, well, what happened? I mean, part of it is because I use a wide stance when I squat and I use a very narrow stance when I deadlift, right? That's part of it. But I think the main part of it is because I didn't deadlift for 12 weeks. Of course, you're going to lose the skill. Your central nervous system you're not going to have that facilitation with the weight now. It's going to feel uncomfortable. You're not going to have that fluidity.
Yeah, and I'm of the school of thought, which might not be 100% popular right now, that the best way to get strong on the lift is to practice that lift. That's probably because I come from Olympic weightlifting, but I don't believe in like I'm going to train every variation of the squat possible except the squat, and my squat's going to go up. That's not the way I believe, because some people can pull it off because the capacity to transfer strength gains from one movement to another is highly dependent on acetylcholine level. So people with high acetylcholine, high serotonin, they will be able to transfer motor skill very easily. But most people don't have that. So most people, if they stop practicing a movement, even if they do a very similar movement, they will lose performance on the one they didn't train. Even if it's very, very similar, in fact, it can be even worse if both movements are similar, because now for example, let's say you specialize for 10 weeks on the incline bench press and you don't do flat bench press, okay? When you're going to get back to the bench press, your brain has been using for its only pressing pattern the incline press. That's the pressing pattern it knows. So once you get back to bench pressing, it will try to use that exact same pattern, and you will be all over the place. You won't be able to press in a group. I mean, and it goes even further than that. I remember like several years ago, I did a block of 8 weeks where all my lifting was done from pins, so for pure concentrics. I was bench pressing from pins, starting 1 inch from the chest. I eventually worked up to 425 from that position. Right. So I figured, well, once I get back to regular bench pressing, I will at least do 425 because I'm doing 425 without the benefit of the stretch reflex. Dude, I failed at 365. And it's the exact same pattern. But I didn't have to do the transition from eccentric to concentric. So just because I didn't train that and my level of performance was high, then I had a big drop in performance. It took me 4 weeks to get my bench press back up. And again, that's what people fail to. I mean, I train a female. She's the world record holder in the 67 kilo class with a 265 kilo squat. Wow. She actually did 270 for a double in training. Well, she's like 5 foot and like short legs for a height. So mechanical advantage. Yeah. A training for, let's say, like the 10 weeks leading up to a competition, it's only squat, bench, and deadlift. That's it. We do plenty of sets. For example, she would work up to a 2 RM for the day, then do 5 back off set with 90% for a double, for example. So she would do that but she only did squat, bench, deadlift, maybe some farmers walk for core. That's it. That's it. Right. So I mean, off season, we do something else, but it's just basically to get her mind off of like the squat so that she can enjoy her training, but she doesn't make gains during those periods.
Right. As I'm listening to you talk, it reminds me when I did an experiment where I was focused on deficit deadlifts. Like, I'm just going to do deficit deadlifts, 2 inches, 3 inches for the next 12 weeks, and then let's see what transfer there is to off the floor. I actually got stronger on deficit than I was off the floor, even though it's a much longer motion. And with deficit, it forces you to get more of a legs drive. Yeah. But that legs drive doesn't replicate off the floor because you can't drop your hips as much. So, I mean, it just goes to show you how precise training has to be. Because it's very similar, right? Deficit deadlift off the floor, 2 inches. But it makes such a huge difference. And as I'm listening to you talk too, it makes me wonder about, is this an inherent flaw in something such as the West Side conjugate system, where you're not doing traditional bench press that you would do competing, you're doing similar moves, right, and rotating them often.
Yeah, that's always been the limitation I've seen with the conjugate system. However, to be fair, they do practice the competition lift during their dynamic effort day.
Okay, that's true.
Which can kind of like circumvent that issue. So what I feel is that basically when you look at the 3 different pieces of the conjugate system, you have the max effort, dynamic effort, and repetition effort method, which is their assistance work. Basically, each piece has its purpose. The max effort, it just train you to grind a weight up, which is a skill. I mean, personally, I can't grind a weight up. It goes up fast or it doesn't go up. Absolutely. But I could train it, but it drains me too much to do that. Okay. But the max effort method, and what I actually find to be smart with the way they're using the max effort method, is that when you do a max effort, there's bound to be some technical issues with the lift. Okay, so if you always do the max effort with the actual competition lift, you're going to take bad motor habits because technique will break down somewhat. Okay, so if you do max effort on a movement similar to the lift, but it's not the main lift, you don't have that bad impact on technique while you're still training your capacity to grind the weight up. Okay, right. Then you have the dynamic effort. In their mind, or in Louis' mind when he was developing the system, the dynamic effort is because, well, force equals mass times acceleration. So if you work on acceleration, you get stronger. But in reality, I really believe it's that they're actually practicing the skill of doing the movement they need to do in competition with a weight that's manageable enough to not have any bad technique happen. So I really believe that the dynamic effort, just like Fred Hatfield's compensatory acceleration training, was the main benefit was not so much that they're moving fast, is that they're moving properly.
Right.
So, and then you have the repetition effort method, which is what built their muscle and the muscle strength and muscle mass. So the system actually end up working. Okay, it's not the way I would do it, because I prefer to still practice the lift I'm going to be competing at with decent weight. I prefer the way I periodize for strength is I will normally use more of a hypertrophy block, if you want, where I do higher reps. Either higher reps or higher time under tension with one of the tools you're going to mention, with pauses to lengthen the duration of the set. Basically, the accumulation phase for powerlifter when I train them is not so much to build muscle as it is to prepare the body for the heavier lifting to come. So that means, yes, building muscle, but it means strengthening tendons, strengthening core, improving position, maximizing technical development, and being strong at every key angle in the movement. So when you load the movement heavily, you don't break down at those weaker points, right?
Right.
So I would do that. Then the second phase is strength skill, where we increase the frequency of the competition lift to 3 days a week, but train submaximally. Let's say, for example, 5 sets of 3 with 80%, for example. Right. We gradually wave up the weight, but it's still fairly easy. And then the last 3 or 4 weeks would be max effort, but max-ish effort in that I don't recommend ever ramping up to a 1 RM in training anymore. I mean, there's really no need to just go to a 2 RM. I mean, that's going to be your opener anyway. What you can easily lift for 2 reps, that's your opener on competition day. So it's still heavier than what you did on strength skill, and you decrease the frequency of the lift to once or maybe twice a week. If we go really heavy, we're going to go ahead, like max effort 1 day and technical like 70% on a day 2, just to correct what technical flaws might have appeared on the main lift.
Right. I think people get distracted by variety. I think that's a trap, especially for beginners, where someone just started training and they've been doing barbell squats for 2 months, and then they see someone on Instagram using the bands. Hey, I need that. But you don't even have the proper mechanics yet. The last thing you need is variety right now.
There's nothing worse for motor learning than changing the strength curve or the resistance curve in that case. It changes the feeling of the movement completely. Because, I mean, again, going back to an experiment I did years ago, I was doing overhead press with bands, because at that time I was doing bands on everything. I want to figure this thing out. I worked up to 185 with bands. So I figured that probably like 245, 255 at the top. So I figured, well, I'm going to be able to do at least 225 strict press for my sets once I remove the bands. You know how much I did? The same 185. And it felt like I had forgotten how to press. Like, what the hell is going on? I mean, it felt weird. It completely changes the mechanic of the movement, even though it's the same movement. In fact, changing the resistance curve of a movement while keeping the movement exactly the same is the worst thing for motor learning, because now the motor pattern, the brain still wants to use that movement pattern, but it just doesn't work anymore. It will feel like a ton of weight at the bottom position. It will feel featherweight when you unrack it. Like your squat, you did, for example, 8 weeks of squat with bands. You remove the bands, you unrack the bar. It feels like nothing, but in the bottom, it feels like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders. Yeah. And it just walking back with the bands. I mean, so much core challenge, which is actually a positive thing if you have the core strength to do it. But even then, I really believe that very few people actually need bands change and stuff like that. Very few, if any. I mean, only powerlifters using power suits or band shirts, because the shirt and the suit, they reverse the strength curve.
Right.
Because the shirt, normally in a bench press, you're weaker in the bottom, you're stronger at the top. Same thing with the squat. I mean, if you do a half squat, you're stronger than the full squat. And the squat suit, what it does is that it makes the bottom easy, because it basically propels you upward. Like the first half is done by the suit. Now the bottom is easier, the top is harder, which is the opposite of what you see normally with free weights. And the chains or bands, they do the exact same thing. It's easy in the bottom or in the top. So for powerlifters who are using gear, that's perfectly fine. But for anybody else, it just creates more problem than not. I mean, I don't like variation in exercises. I believe that At first, it's important to master the body's capacity to move, but that doesn't require 25 different variations of the squat or deadlift or bench. When you stick to the basics, when I want variation, I vary the style of execution of the repetition, like pauses that you want to mention, like slow eccentrics, for example, like explosive concentrics.
Right, great point. As I'm listening to you, I remember I did an experiment with bands on deadlifts, and just like you said, it's much easier off the floor now, and it gets much harder as you pass the knees and as you get closer to lockout, it's most intense. Two problems I experienced with this: number one, it changed my technique because of the different strength curve, as you mentioned. And number two, it didn't strengthen what I needed, which is more strength off the floor. I'm already, if I get it to the knees, it's going to go to lockout. I've never lifted a heavy weight to just below the knees and I couldn't finish it. Now, that's not the problem. So it's first couple inches off the floor. That's the problem. So clearly it was the wrong focus for me. Maybe for someone that has a hard time with the lockout, but is that something you've experienced? People that actually are strong off the floor naturally, but have a hard time locking out a weight?
Well, I think that a lot of time that's more of a technical issue than a strength issue. They often, the most often problem that I see with that is they just don't engage or keep their lats engaged properly. So they just lose that lat tightness, which the body will round slightly. It shifts the weight slightly forward, and you have bad lever, then you can't make the lift. If your lats stay engaged, the bar will stay glued to your body, and then you pull slightly back, because if you try to pull straight upward, it won't work. But if you have good technique and your lats stay engaged, you should never have problem with a lockout, unless like you just run out of steam because you're tired.
Right, right. Yeah, and the other thing is, I think what happens with variety for the sake of variety is it becomes more of a marketing type approach, because often trainers will hear this from clients: I get bored easily, or this is boring. But my response to that is, who gets bored with progress? I've never been bored. Yeah, I can do the same. If I'm doing the same exact movements week after week, but I'm getting stronger consistently, I've never been bored when I'm making progress. I've never been bored when my physique is looking better from training or I'm getting stronger. So to me, it's not so much that you're bored, it's just that you're not making progress. Right. And you're thinking that variety is the solution to that.
100% accurate. I mean, and from a neurological standpoint, when you accomplish a goal, okay, and a goal could be the goal for the workout, I am slightly stronger than last week, you get a dopamine spike, okay, which gives you a pleasure response. And that will give you all the reward you need. You don't need to feel a sense of novelty to be satisfied from your workout, because you get the pleasure response from the improvement you're seeing. Now, I see two problems with that nowadays, though. The first one is, and it's highly due to social media, but not in the way you want to discuss, but like flat screens, like blue light. Okay. People are bombarded by dopamine stimuli that are way stronger than what your body actually produces once it reaches a goal. That's how motivation works. Motivation, you get a pleasure, you have an anticipated pleasure response from reaching a goal. So I have this goal in mind, and you give some importance to that goal. Once you achieve it, you get a pleasure response. Okay, that's how it works. But all through the journey, okay, you are anticipating subconsciously that pleasure response, right? And the higher the pleasure response is, or it is anticipated to be, the more resilient you are, okay? The lesser the response you have, the more you will be like veered off course or lose motivation when things get hard. Right. Because nowadays, if the pleasure response is low, that the anticipated pleasure response is low, when things get hard or repetitive or whatnot, your brain thinks, well, this is not worth it. It's not worth it, okay? You need a strong pleasure response. The problem is that with all the modern stimuli that target dopamine, your brain is becoming desensitized. I mean, there's no way your brain can compete with social media or can compete with video games, all that stuff, or nicotine, that gives you such a strong dopamine response that it makes your receptor resistant to your natural stimulus, to your natural dopamine. So now you're just gradually losing motivation. So that's the problem. For guys like you and I, achieving those small goals does give the required pleasure response to stay motivated. But for the modern person who is bombarded and essentially a dopamine addict, then there's a good chance that even if we tell them, you know what, you lifted 20 pounds more this week, it actually does not give him a pleasure response because his receptors are desensitized. So you do what you do when something does not give you a pleasure response. You go somewhere else. Like when your relationship stops working, you go on Tinder and you find something else. I mean, because you don't just see that in training. I can guarantee that those who just can't stick to their training, even when things are going well, are those who are also looking to constantly change their pleasures in other facets of their lives.
Absolutely. And I've been down this road before, actually, everything you're saying, where I have a dopamine type personality or an addictive type personality. So for example, I'm not a gambler, fortunately, and I definitely should never go down that road to see if I could handle it, because I'm the kind of person where if I started gambling, initially I would get let's say I'm playing blackjack and I win 20 bucks. I might think, wow, I won 20 bucks. And you get this little high. Yeah. Then maybe within a week, 20 bucks is nothing. 100 bucks is nothing. $5,000 is nothing. $100,000 is nothing. And now you go into this bottomless pit because it's never going to be enough. It's like when people talk about heroin, they go, the first time heroin is so addictive because the first time someone takes it, they never have felt better in their life than that first high. But not only are they never going to get that with heroin, they're never going to get that anywhere else. So it causes serious mental health issues, to say the least, and highly addictive behavior as well, because you're constantly chasing that high, thinking, okay, let me just take more and then I'll get it. Nope, that didn't work. Okay, let me take more and then go do this. Let me try even more risky behavior. I'm going to take heroin and then I'm going to go have sex with a prostitute without wearing protection, right? You just start amping it up because you're looking for these extreme experiences. And I think that happens to a lot of people, is that once you go down this road of chasing extreme experiences, it's never going to be enough. Every time you're just going to keep getting used to levels. Someone may think, okay, let me go to a strip club for variety. Okay, that's not working anymore. All right, let me go to a prostitute for variety. Oh, that's not working anymore. Okay, let me just have affairs now. And then eventually that's not working anymore. And then your whole life goes down the drain because you have this addictive quality that it just takes over your entire life.
Exactly.
And just ruins it. We've seen that so many times.
100%. It's not everybody, but it explains in part why a lot of people needed variation in training. And I'll be honest, I mean, there's very little we can do because it's like talking to an addict. I mean, say, dude, you're going to get much better results if you stick with this and just give it all you've got. You say, yeah, but I can't do it.
Yeah.
Well, I like variation, but I get my variation from changing repetition styles. I mean, I keep the same movement, but I will maybe move faster, move slower, pauses, stuff like that. To me, that feels just as good as changing the movement, but at least it has a very strong carryover to the actual movement because you never change the movement itself.
That's a good segue into the static holds and the different pauses. Because one thing I've been playing around with deadlifts, I've been working on the deadlift for a long time. In fact, people probably wonder if I do anything else besides that's good how much I talk about it. But it's one of those moves that's really good for my body types. You tend to gravitate towards things that you're naturally better at. Like squatting for me has never been comfortable, barbell squatting. But deadlifts, I just have the right levers for it. So it's one that I got, out of all the lifts that I've worked on, that's the one that improves the most. Plus I like doing it, so that's a big factor as well. But one thing I've been doing recently is instead of just chasing more weight, because I found that when I do that, I start adding the weight too quickly and my technique starts getting a little bit off kilter each week. And then all of a sudden you get to a point where the technique looks atrocious if you keep going down that road. So what I'm doing now is doing the exact opposite. So before I would drop my hips and try to explode off the floor. So I get the bar to just below the knees as efficiently and as effectively as possible, drive through with the hips. But what I'm doing now is purposely driving the weight off the ground slowly. In other words, not exploding. So I grab it and intently start pulling it slowly through that entire range of motion. And then one thing I started doing after we spoke last time is very deliberate negatives too, which I've never done on deadlifts. And I got to tell you, if you've never focused on negatives on deadlifts, you will be shocked how fatigued you are with the weight that you can do concentrically very easily. I mean, I was just doing 405, which is a light weight for me, but doing those slow negatives back to the floor where it doesn't make that thud that we hear people doing in the gym, which I think is one of the main reasons why people like doing it, because they I mean, they're dropping 225 from the knees, and everyone's turning and looking, and no one's impressed. But it's sloppy. It looks terrible. But when you're doing that, when you do a very deliberate negative, in a lot of ways, that feels more difficult, at least right now, than the concentric, because gravity is really trying to pull that weight down, and you're just resisting to the point where it just makes a very soft thud when it hits the ground. And then I stepped it up by doing slow off the ground, and then right below the knees, I hold it there. I pause for a second, contract, static hold, and then finish it off. And I'm finding that this gives me some variety without taking away from the practice of the move I'm trying to improve.
And it really targets your weakest area.
Right.
Meaning that if you're weaker off the floor than locking out, which is the case, what you want to do is to make the bottom portion harder.
Right.
So, and the goal would be eventually to use the same weight for all your repetition style. But you know, I believe that the way to strengthen a weak point is just to make life harder for you in that zone. And pauses, deliberately slow movement are among those strategies. Now, there's a difference between going slow on purpose on a big compound movement and going slow on purpose when trying to isolate a muscle, for example. A different goal. I mean, personally, when you look at a fast rep, moving a rep as fast as you can from the start will have the benefit of increasing power production. Okay, so when you're moving a light weight or a lighter weight or an easy weight with as much as acceleration as possible, you're maximizing your force production. So you're going to get more power, better muscle fiber recruitment. But what you get out of going slow on purpose is you get more stability. You get also stronger at every joint angle in that zone. Because if you rely on acceleration or even like pumping your hips and using the stretch reflex in the bottom, then you're creating a very, very high force production once you break the bar off the floor. But then it creates momentum, so you actually have to produce less force until the bar reaches the knees. Whereas if you go slow on purpose, at each point in the range of motion, you have to produce voluntarily maximal tension. So that's what I mean by you make it harder on yourself. Also, you're going to have more movement precision. You strengthen the core more. And I really love pauses because it is my belief that when you have a weak point, spend more time in that weak point. I mean, the key to getting stronger in your weak point is to spend time in that weak point. So the isometric, I mean, several ways you can do that. You can do like 1.5 reps. So for example, if you do deadlift, you go floor to knees, full rep. That's 1 rep, for example. So you're tripling or you're doubling the bottom portion. You're spending more time in that zone, right? Well, going slow on purpose, it's another way to spend more time in that zone. Pausing is another way to spend more time in that zone. Slow eccentric, another more time to spend more time in that zone, which is, in my opinion, the key to strengthening that portion. Because normally, when you're strong in a movement, but you have one weak area, that's neurological. 9 times out of 10. I mean, yeah, sure, from the bottom, it's more quads, and past the knees, it's more glutes, sure. But if you have the strength to move like 550 from the floor, you have the strength, you're strong, right? You don't have lagging muscles that are really the problem in how much weight you can move. Yeah, the muscle strength is there. So it's mostly a matter of neurology. So it's keeping the movement stable, maximizing that tension in that zone. So that's why, for example, another way I like to train for the bottom position of a deadlift is floating deadlift. So imagine doing a deficit deadlift, so on a 2-inch plate, for example, but you're going to start with the plates, the plates on the bar, 2 inches from the floor also. So it's the exact same position as a regular deadlift, but you are under tension from the start. So you are making the bottom position harder. So again, it's another way to spend more time or work harder in that position. So yeah, pauses on top of that, it really give you a mental cue about feeling your body position. It can help you program key position in the movement. So it could be below the knees if that's your sticking point. It could be 1 inch from the floor if that's your sticking point. It could be just above the knees if that's your sticking point. But you do a pause, normally slightly below your sticking point, because your sticking point is actually not your weak point. Your sticking point is where you ran out of steam. Okay, The weak point is where you are weaker. Well, it says it. So now you are too weak to keep accelerating the weight. So it starts to get slower and slower and slower until it stops. When it stops, you fail the lift, right? So the position where you failed the lift is your sticking point, but you actually started failing the lift maybe 2 or 3 inches below that. So that a lot of people, they do sticking point work too high because they do it at their sticking point. You need to do it, and that still works because there's a 15 degrees carryover, but it's less effective than if you do it like 2 inches below that sticking point, which is your weak point.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing here is that for I think you can get variety and frequency. You can bring those two worlds together. So, for example, if I'm deadlifting 3 times a week, one day could be focused on holds and deliberate negatives. Another day could be focused on being explosive, lightweight but being explosive. Another day could be focusing on long pauses at the bottom, or just so in other words, you're doing the same movement pattern, but you're just changing the mechanics of it a little bit. You're changing the tempo and all that. Just
exactly how I train athletes. When I train athletes, that's exactly how I work. My system is called the Omnic contraction training. So it's whole body. So it's always like 3 or 4 big lifts in a workout. So let's say hinge, it could be an hinge or a squat, could be an Olympic lift, could be a press, a pull, whatever. And one day is eccentric focus, so slow, deliberate eccentrics. One day is statodynamics, so we're going to have isometric holds. And it could be pure isometrics also. So in some cases, we might do pure isometrics or functional isometrics. And on the last day, it's concentric. And depending on the phase, it could be just regular concentric. It could be accelerated concentric, or it could be max effort, depending. But it's always one eccentric, one statodynamic or isometric, and one concentric, absolutely.
This is the kind of variety that makes sense to me, rather than, and I think it's a happy medium between both worlds too, where instead of doing a move such as pull-ups with the same exact technique every single time, you change a couple modalities of it. You do a hold at the top, you do a slow negative. And one thing I like about the deliberate repetitions, as well as just intensification factors such as the pauses, is that it allows you to increase intensity without increasing weight.
I was going to mention that.
Yeah, we tend to be very focused on, if I'm not adding more weight, then I'm not getting stronger. And in a very black and white world, I can see why people get fixated that way. But if I get really good at the lowering phase of a pull-up, or let's say I can hold the top for, let's say if I went from 10 repetitions traditional on pull-ups to 10 repetitions where I can hold the top for 3 seconds and lower under control and pull from a dead hang. That's a progression.
You got stronger. Now, eventually, even like with beginners, my belief is that the most important. Hey, can I go to the bathroom real quick?
Yeah, of course. Of course.
Yeah.
I'll just yeah, sure. Take your time. All right, Grover, you have any input you want to bring in while he's doing that? What do you think about what we're talking about so far? Huh? This is my podcast co-host, Grover.
I'm just drinking way too much water.
Yeah,
just at breakfast, I down 3 liters.
Well, is this for some reason, or are you working on something?
Like hyperhidrosis or something. I'm always thirsty.
Oh, okay. I've
always been like that. Can we go back?
Yeah, sure.
I was going to mention, like with beginners, one approach I really like, I call it because, again, 2 things to me, there are 2 key things in getting gains, okay? Either gains in strength or size or power or whatnot. First is proper execution of the movement, okay? That's either good technique if you're lifting for strength, or being able to shift the tension to the muscle you want to target or develop if you're doing more hypertrophy work. Okay. And the second thing is progression. You need to progress in some regard. But people tend to think of progression in terms of adding weight. There are many other ways. I mean, the progressive overload for me is the overload of the stress of training, not overload of the weight. So if you're working harder, if what you did is more demanding than what you did last week, you got better. So as I mentioned, if you can do paused what you did without pause, you're getting stronger, right? So one method I like to use with beginners, I call it the fixed weight progression model. So each week, instead of adding weight to the bar, we make the conditions slightly more difficult. So for example, week 1, we're going to do normal reps. So let's say 3 seconds down, 1 second up, for example. Then the second week, we're going to go slow eccentric, 5 seconds down. The third week, we're going to have a 3 to 4 second pause during the eccentric. Okay. Then the next week, a 3 second pause during the concentric. And in the last phase of the block, a pause both during the eccentric and the concentric. After that, we go back to step 1 and we add weight. And we spend 6 weeks with the same weight, but getting stronger because you're working harder. But even more important for beginners, each step actually reinforces proper technique. Because, well, at first they need to learn the movement. So don't overcomplicate with, they have to count tempos and stuff like that. Just the movement properly. Yeah. Then just go down slowly. So, and it's been proven that a slow eccentric increases the activation of the motor cortex, leading to faster motor learning. So, and obviously you need to control the movement better. And as a coach, if you're looking at a person, you can better give feedback about the position and stuff like that. Then by including pauses during the isometric, even 1 or even 2 pauses during the set, well, at key position, you are strengthening the key positions in the lift, making technique more efficient, and so on and so forth. So once they get back to the second block, now they can add 10, 20 pounds, but it actually feels a lot easier than the way it felt the week before, even though it's heavier, because they go back to normal reps. And it's just a huge confidence booster.
I think this is a great way to play around with these things. Just because I remember I did an experiment with super slow training way back in the day, where it's a 10-second negative, 5-second concentric. But the thing is I only did it that way. So I did every single move using these parameters, and I did it for maybe, I don't know, 8 weeks. And of course,
you were able to do 8 weeks.
You know, this is so long ago. I don't know if I even lasted that long, but definitely over a month I did this. It might have been 8 weeks actually. And I mean, I did everything super slow. And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to be so much stronger when I go back to regular tempo. And then I remember that I put 315 on the bar, which I could do for maybe 5 reps for this program. Couldn't even do it once.
Yeah, not surprised.
Now that skill of being able to explode and move it quickly, that skill was gone, because now my brain's thinking, okay, this is what we're doing now. We're doing everything slow. So you're making progress in the context of lifting very slowly. Yeah. But that doesn't mean it's going to carry over to a different kind of tempo. So I think that's where people get a little bit, they get unnecessary, they make the wrong conclusions, is where I'm going with this. It's not so much that 10-second negatives, 5-second is erroneous or should never be used. It's just that you use it maybe one day out of a program. You don't do it only that for months on end. And then yeah.
Isn't the purpose of it?
Like your approach.
Yeah. But again, because the reason I'm using that is really to ingrain technique and stability and core strength and positional strength. And once you get that, but even an advanced lifter still needs those things. But it can be done, as you mentioned, only 1 day a week. That's more than enough just to maintain or improve that capacity.
Right. So this all makes a lot of sense in the context of strength training. What about with conditioning work? So for example, let's say I have a conditioning day where I flip a tire across the room and then I push a sled, battling ropes, kettlebell swings. And instead of just flipping a tire back and forth for as many sets as I can, I do that, then I do sled, then I do ropes, then I do swings. I'm doing a variety of different motions. I'm not necessarily focused on performance with these things. In other words, I'm not thinking I'm going to compete in a tire flipping contest or I'm going to compete in a sled contest. So does it matter as much in this context? Because the goal here is just improving your cardiovascular capacity.
That's it. To me, I mean, When it comes to conditioning, especially hard conditioning, I mean, we could separate conditioning into like 5 different parts. You have anaerobic power, anaerobic capacity, aerobic power, aerobic capacity. Then you have VO2 max, for example. Okay, so so you have, but let's say conditioning in for us, which would be intense conditioning. So to me, the number one thing when it comes to conditioning is just hard work. Right. I see it. In fact, those days I call them physical labor days.
Right. That's what it feels like.
It might that because words have power. So, I mean, for example, I have a program. I have like 20 people on, and there's the physical manual. I call it the manual labor day. So it's a circuit of movements covering the whole body. Like you have farmer's walk, you have dumbbell clean and press. Because I don't have any special equipment, you have prowler pushing, and then you have deadlift, and it's all with very lightweight, fairly lightweight. But the goal is just to go nonstop, and it's just to work hard. Like for example, and I don't try to add weight. The goal is to add work in a certain period of time. So for example, the physical labor workout itself, and again, that's a long conditioning. It's 30 minutes. Okay, so it's not like, so you have that 30 minutes, and the goal is to accumulate as much work as possible during that 30 minutes. So at first, a guy got 10 circuits. Then the next week he got 12. Now he's at 15 circuits for 30 minutes, which is insane. It's literally like CrossFit pace because it's 2 minutes per circuit for 4 exercises covering the whole body. And I always go from one upper body dominant, one lower body dominant, because peripheral heart action training. The body will always send more blood to the region being trained, being used, right? So you adjust blood flow to those regions. So when you constantly change from upper to lower body, it's a great demand on the vascular system. So the impact is even better. So for example, if you go like battle ropes and then tire flip, then you have one more upper body, one more lower body, so that works pretty well. But to me, it's really more about pushing the effort threshold. It's not the goal. I don't care about the weight being used. I care about the feeling of like working hard, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. So I think this is where people that love variety, save that for your conditioning type
Absolutely.
work.
It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter as long as it's hard. If it sucks, it's working.
Yeah. So if I'm doing kettlebell swings for conditioning, I don't necessarily care how many reps I achieve. So I'm not going to say, okay, I did 50 reps total, so next time I got to do 55 and all that. I'm using it more as a way to just do work capacity, like what you're saying. And bringing up the physical labor point's interesting. So I remember growing up when I was a teenager, the strongest people I knew were people that did manual labor. They would and worked out as well. So someone building decks all day or hot tub delivery service, and then that person goes to the gym. Those people had a different kind of strength, especially grip strength. They tend to have more developed forearms, things like that too. But I think also a level of mental toughness, because their conditioning, without them probably even really being aware of it, is what's way more pronounced. Their conditioning and mental toughness.
And it's not just mental, well, it is mental toughness, but there's an actual physiological reason. Remember I mentioned earlier central fatigue, okay? The main driver of central fatigue is the feeling of discomfort, of pain, of effort, right? The thing is that just like with anything, the more you do something, the less desensitized you become to it. You mentioned the heroin thing, right? So when you often do that kind of brutally hard work, well, you still get the same level of pain, but the signal sent to the body, to the brain, is less and less and less because it is not perceived as something dangerous anymore. So you get less central fatigue. So mental toughness in that regard is more a matter of you are maintaining your full motor cortex capacity to recruit the fast twitch fibers so that there's no decrease in motivation or performance when it starts to get painful. So that's one of the reasons why conditioning, besides all the benefit from recovery capacity to stuff like that, and just to be able to tolerate more volume, it allows you to push back central fatigue or to tolerate physical discomfort a lot easier.
Right, right. I mean, this is a tangent here, but it reminds me of some of the reasons why people's health declines is because they adapt to every decline. So for example, let's say someone had a really good testosterone level at 25 and it's gone down a little bit by the time they're 30, but not so much that they're running to the doctor to have levels checked and get over it. But they've gotten used to that decline. So they think it's normal. Like, oh yeah, this is because you don't even remember how you used to feel.
Yeah.
Because it's so long ago, your brain has adapted to it. Kind of like with older dogs. Older dogs, they develop hip problems and joint pain and all that. Now, if it happened suddenly when they were young, they're puppies. Let's say one day a 3-year-old dog is running around pain-free, and then the next day all of a sudden this dog has severe arthritis. That's going to be really distressing. You're going to be like, wow, what happened? Yesterday I was running up a hill. Today I can barely move. But it happens so gradually that they adapt to each phase of it. And then it gets to a point where you don't even remember what it felt like to not be in pain. In other words, you have a level of pain that is no longer perceived as pain for you because you've gotten used to it. You're like, oh, well,
it's your normal.
It hurts. So that all of a sudden it doesn't, the damage is still there, but the perception of the pain from the damage is less. Not because, like you said, you got mentally tougher, it's just that you just adapted to that.
The signals just are lesser and lesser. Funny thing you mentioned about the dogs. My older dog, well, he's passed now, but he had hip issues, and I brought him to an acupuncturist. That was like a last resort kind of thing. And dude, I mean, he went from not being able to walk to jumping on a couch like instantly. And there's no placebo effect in dogs, right?
Oh, no way.
That shocked me.
Yeah, because I'm dealing with, as we were talking before we recorded, my oldest dog, Grover, 18, he's getting towards the end. In fact, it may have to happen today because he's just that level of, he's really mentally tough. So it's for anyone who's ever had to put a dog down, sometimes it's very easy to read. I've had dogs which are in obvious distress where you're not doing them any favors, keeping them going. But Grover's different because he has a very hard time walking right now. He doesn't want to eat much. He's barely drinking, but he still perks up when he sees me. He still wags his tail. He still wants to be around me. He's sitting right next to me as we're recording this. I just carried him over here to sit next to me. And he looks like he's calm and okay. But that gives you the illusion that, oh yeah, he's going to be fine. Let's just keep it going like this. Eventually it gets to a pain threshold though, where it is, if it's obvious to you that they're in discomfort, that means they've been in discomfort for a long time because dogs are so tough. They just accept whatever happens to them.
And they want to hide it. The animals don't want to show weakness.
Absolutely, you're right.
That is a really unpleasant topic.
Oh. We won't stay on this one for too long. Right now this is a actually, yesterday when I was thinking about whether we were going to have to take Grover in to just put him to rest, I was like, maybe I should text Christian and just say let's skip this, let's move it a week out. But then I was thinking, you know what? I could use the distraction right now. I could use a little break from thinking about this. And then also, I know you're a dog lover as well. I didn't realize one of your dogs had passed recently. That's terrible. But it's anyone who loves animals can relate to this topic.
And if anything, I was lucky because it happened when we were not around. Actually, I had to go bring him up, but it happened like suddenly.
Yeah.
I didn't have to make the decision. I honestly don't think I could make it.
It's so hard. I've had dogs pass where I had a Cocker Spaniel I adopted when he was really old. He was 15. It was more of a hospice situation. I just wanted to help the shelter out. I figured this dog probably won't even make it out of the year, but I'd rather have him die in a nice home than in a shelter by himself. So I felt like it was just a hospice situation. He ended up living another 2 years because all of a sudden he had hope again. He's in a nice family. He's getting good food. He has people that care about him. Just like people, we need reasons to keep going, especially when we're under a lot of distress. And he passed the best way you could hope for for an animal person is that I picked him up and carried him downstairs. His whole body went limp. He whimpered a little bit and then he passed minutes later. And I've been down this road before, so I knew it was imminent. I knew he was about to pass. So I just laid him down on the carpet, put a blanket on him. He passed very peacefully and in a gentle manner. Now, that's the ideal situation that rarely happens. It rarely goes down that way. I've had 5 dogs, Grover's going to be the 6th one passed in the last 10 years. And just about every single time, you had to make that call. And it's the worst feeling ever when you're driving to the vet's office. No, yeah. The drive over is the worst. The waiting in the room is the worst. And then when they're putting the injection in your mind, you're thinking, I should grab him right now and just run out. Because your instincts are to protect your animal, to save him. I go, I can't let this happen. But then you have to accept it though, because if you let it go on for too long, you're not doing them any favors. Now it's about you. And everyone knows this. I'm sure people have told you this before. It doesn't make it any easier when it happens. You don't feel good about it, but you're not supposed to feel good about it. No one feels good about it.
If you feel good about it or feel neutral, there's something wrong about you, or maybe you shouldn't have dogs in the first place.
It's like, oh, okay. So some people put their dogs down because the medical bills are too high.
Right.
I don't want to pay that. And then there's some people are like that. Or they'll go, I'll drop them off at the shelter. So now you have a dog that's at death's door that's in a shelter because someone didn't want to take care of it to the very end. Those are people clearly, those are not people like us or anyone who's watching this who loves dogs. People like that you're not going to make it's a hard decision to make. You're going to deliberate on. I've been deliberating on this all week because the problem is last week he was doing okay. Yeah. He wasn't running around like a puppy, but he was doing okay. He was able to come up the stairs, sleep in the bedroom with us. He was able to drink water. He wanted to eat his favorite foods. So last week I'm thinking, hey, he may make it to the end of the year. But I've had so many dogs where I know it can go south real fast. And what I was thinking today is I was just watching him just struggle to just walk around the house. I go, if I went over to a friend's house and I saw a dog in this condition and he or she said, what do you think I should do? Because I'm detached from that, I would say I think that the humane thing to do is to let him go peacefully because this is no way for a dog to live. Now it's easy to tell, it's not easy to tell anyone that, but it's easier to tell someone else that. But when you're in the situation, your brain starts going to a very irrational place. You start thinking, what if I put him down and this was just temporary? He was actually going to get better next year.
He was on the verge of a breakthrough.
Yeah, exactly. It's like one more week he would have been eating again and running, and I deprived him of that. That's where your guilt feelings start going. But because I've been down this road so many times, I know how these things end, and you just have to take solace in the fact that you gave this animal a really good life and that you decided their term. You didn't let them suffer unnecessarily. You did the humane thing for them. And no one feels good about it. No one feels great about it. The only thing that really helps is getting another dog at some point. It doesn't have to be the same day or the same week or same month or even the same year, but at some point you'll want to do that. That'll make you feel better because you're paying that love you have for the animal forward. That's what you're doing.
And you shouldn't be guilty about getting a new dog either. People are guilty about getting a new dog.
Yeah, they can be. I think if you do it too soon, you might feel that way. I think it's important to just grieve for a while. But honestly, my opinion is the only thing that really makes you feel better is when you get another animal because they're basically spiritual beings for us. They have, like my dog Raina, who's Grover used to be my sidekick where he went everywhere with me. Now Raina has become that dog, and I have her designated as a therapy dog, so I can take her everywhere. Take her to casinos, restaurants, doctor's office, grocery store, you name it. And that's even better. So we're bonding even more because we spend so much time together. But it does so much for my mental health. Things that are seemingly boring, like I hate running errands. I hate going to the grocery store or doing any kind of shopping where it's just not something I look forward to. But with her, it's not as boring. Because she's excited. I go to a casino, she's like, wow, this is crazy. All of a sudden, I'm a celebrity too because everyone, I feel like I'm with the celebrity, I should say, because I walk in there, all of a sudden everyone's turning, they go, hey, look at that dog. And then you meet the nicest people. I go walking down the promenade in Vegas or Town Square or on the Strip. The nicest people come up to you and do stop and chats. They show you pictures of their dog. They want to pet your dog. People that you never would have talked to before, especially someone like me. I don't look like the most approachable person walking around. I don't have a big smile on my face at all times while I'm walking around. So not too many people are going to think, hey, let's go talk to that guy. But when you have a dog, it has a disarming effect. And also people who love animals are naturally going to gravitate towards others.
People who love dogs are good people anyway.
Yeah, that's where I'm going with this is you meet the nicest people. The people I like the most in our neighborhood are people I see at the dog park every day. They're really nice people. So you're definitely right. So we'll transition away from this topic before I start feeling emotional about this. And we can end with You made some really good points about the whole dopamine effect of Instagram in particular.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing it's creating is an ADHD society, where our ADD or ADHD, right? Where here's what I've actually had people tell me this, that they can't watch a movie anymore because it requires too much concentration. They can't go to a movie theater and shut their phone off for 2 hours and just focus on what they're watching. That's why when you go to, I mean, I don't know how often you go to a movie theater, but we go all the time. And you always see people get up every 30 minutes, looking at their phone as they're walking out. Then they come back in. 30 minutes later, they're going back out. Now, some of these people may be someone who has some kind of prostate issue. They have to go to the bathroom often. But most of the time, that's not the case. They're so addicted that they can't even take a 2-hour break from Instagram. It's gotten to the point where real life is a substitute for your Instagram life, or the point of real life is to document it and post it on Instagram. And you made a funny point last time about how the worst relationships you're aware of, like you have friends where they're always posting, oh, here's us having dinner, here's us kissing in front of the Eiffel Tower. They're love bombing each other on Instagram, but offline, they hate each other, or they're dysfunctional, or they don't have a good relationship at all. I think we have this warped society now where it's the perception of you on social media has become more paramount and important than your actual life. And that's scary to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's like, for example, let's say I'm in my office and like, a girl would walk in and ask for a program or coaching, hey? And then she, not 5 minutes in, I have 5,000 followers on Instagram. Can I get a discount? Then I just say, okay, so you're telling me that if you have more followers, you can get a discount because you get publicity or something. Yeah, that's how it works. Well, does it work with coaches too? Like, for example, if I get more followers, can I charge more money? Oh, yeah, I can do that. Well, I don't know much about social media. Can I show you my account and tell me what I need to improve? And with the number of followers I have, how much should I be charging? And she looks at it, there's like 100,000 people. She said, I'm not good at math either, but I think that 100,000 people is a lot more than 5,000, right? So maybe I should charge you more. But you have people like they go to restaurants and they ask for a discount if they make a post, an Instagram post, because they have 5,000 followers.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
A lot of people, the more followers you have, the more value you're deemed as having, the more important you are. So, for example, let's say I ask someone like, "Hey, I'd love to do an episode with you." First thing they're going to look at is the Instagram following.
Yeah.
Like, oh, Mike doesn't even have 10,000 followers. That's a waste of my time. Someone else may have 200,000 followers, but the quality of that experience is going to be low, and you're going to pitch to a bunch of people that aren't remotely serious. Right. I'd rather pitch to 10,000 people where a high percentage of them actually care about the content I'm putting out, as opposed to 200,000 people that are only following me because I post pictures of my abs every day.
And it's shock factor, right? That's why people need to invent all these crazy stuff. And I know a lot of these people, okay? And I know that most of them don't really do the crazy stuff they post on Instagram. Okay? Maybe they do it once in a while, but by judging their Instagram account, that's all they do. But it might be one exercise in the week, but they know that is going to be having the most traction. And that's even worse because now you have coaches, or not just coaches, but people who are documenting their training. They are thinking of creating their workout not to get the best results, but to get the most views. Okay, so they move away from what is actually effective, which is a mastery of the basics, producing proper tension in the right spot, controlling the weight, and just doing that over and over. I mean, I remember. The only time I documented my training, because I'm the old school. I don't like to film myself in the gym. I have to force myself to do Instagram stuff. The only time I documented my training was when I was trying to bring my squat back up to over 500, which was like 2 years ago. So I would film like the top set of every one of my sessions. I was squatting 3 days a week. So all I was posting was one set of squat 3 days a week. That's what I was posting. The only way you could know it was a different set is that I always wore a different football jersey on. And it became kind of my branding. Which player's jersey am I going to be wearing on that video? And that went on for 6 weeks. So that's like literally like 20 videos of me squatting. And that's really that's pretty much all I was doing. I was doing squats 3 days a week, some minor assistance work, and just some bench press to stay sane, because I just wanted to do my squat to go up. But that's what most people actually do. And those who don't train to get results, they train for the shock factor. They end up creating all those crazy exercises that don't do anything.
Yeah. See, my thing is, I have an Instagram account. It's marginally useful for my business. I always debate. I think I could get rid of it. It probably wouldn't make that big of a difference, honestly. It's useful for me to more than posting my workouts for other people to look at. It's good intel for me because I don't have a coach. So for me to film something, a lot of times I do something and I think I did it right, or I think I did it wrong. And when I film it, I can confirm or deny. I can go, okay, I thought I did it right, but that looked terrible. Or that felt kind of off, but it looked really good. So it gives me feedback. But the funny thing is that I get less views over time because I'm not a variety guy. So in other words, you look at my Instagram 4 years ago, what was I doing? I was doing deadlifts, I was doing pull-ups, doing overhead press, doing some kettlebell swings. What am I doing now? Deadlifts, pull-ups, So people see mine and they're going, oh, great, here's Mike doing deadlifts again. Who cares? And I think
that's what effective training is about. That's what it is.
Exactly. It's not exciting to watch necessarily for someone who has this ADD type mindset. But I think what gets people in traps, because I don't consider myself an influencer in any way. I'm not trying to get sponsorships. I'm not trying to get mushroom coffee. I'm not trying to get beet juice powder to sponsor me. Okay, I don't care about any of that stuff. I could care less. But I think as a result of that, I stay true to what I'm doing. While as opposed to someone who is a social media influencer, they're thinking, okay, look, I got 10,000 views last time. I only got 5,000 views this time. So now I've got to do something different to keep getting those views. I think that's where people get into traps. So now what happens is they're putting out all this training information, which is not authentic because they're only doing it for the sake of the post. They're not doing it because that's what makes sense in the program they're doing. So they're actually posting stuff they don't even really do. Like you said, they're doing it at the gym at that moment just to post it. Be like, hey, check out this dragon flag with ankle weights, even though they never do dragon flags, but it looks cool because it's a difficult move and people have a hard time doing it. But you're not getting useful training information is my point, because if someone's just posting for the sake of variety, no rhyme or reason, what's the benefit of me seeing this?
Yeah. And I was talking to a top level coach recently. He's a high performance coach working mostly with hockey players. And what he said to me is that people because I was actually asking him if he wanted a seminar for his staff this year. Okay, right. Because normally before COVID, I always went for 2 days at his gym to teach all of his staff, right? So, which I prefer over seminars where you actually have to sell tickets because, well, it's actual strength coaches and you don't have the pressure of feeling like a prostitute trying to sell your product on Instagram. And the way I circumvent that is when I do a publicity for a seminar, I say something like, no, they made me do it. I really hate to do. I mean, I will take your money, but I really freaking hate doing this. So I'm actually one time we had a Christmas sale, and I did a whole skit about the commercialization of Christmas and how we have lost our values. But you know what? Might as well make some money too. Anyway. But what we were talking about is that what's bad nowadays is that the coaches from our generation, they still value in-person education. So you'll still have coaches come to seminar, but they are always the older coaches. The younger generation get their knowledge from social media, and that's scary. That is their main source of information. I mean, if, for example, let's say that you read books, you read articles from top coaches, you go to seminars, you have even a college degree. Well, you have developed the critical mindset to be capable of analyzing a video you see on YouTube and categorize it as this is entertainment or this is actually useful. People who don't have the knowledge that we have because we've read all our childhood about everything we could find about training, they just can't differentiate if that's going to be effective or it's a clown movement.
Such a good point. Yeah, you don't have that discerning ability at all. I remember just when I first came across T Nation, I think this was before you even started writing there. This was 1998, 1999, something like that. it was such a pleasure to get this. I looked forward to every Friday. I was like, oh, cool, it's going to be a new issue, because there was so much good information, still a lot of good information. But I mean, I devoured that information. I looked forward to it. And I didn't even know what the coaches looked like. You never saw pictures. It added kind of a mystique.
It was a drawing.
Yeah, you had no clue what Ori Hofmeckler would be. There would be an interview with him, but you couldn't find a picture of him to save your life. So you didn't get distracted by all those things. So you had to focus on what they were saying.
Yes.
Yeah. And that was really useful. I picked up so much good information during that phase. And also the ability to actually even read an article is a skill that's going on. Because I remember when I first started writing articles, they wanted, like a magazine, they wanted 3,000 words. Now I would send in a 500 words, like, look, you got to expand on this more. You got to get into more detail. I'm like, okay, I can do that. And then it got to the point where they didn't want more than 100 words. They go, look, this is too long. I go, well, it's only 500 words. They go, no one's going to read this.
Yeah.
That's why when I see someone pontificate on Instagram, that's the funniest thing to me, because they have some picture of them with some quote from Rumi or stuff like, here's me in a bikini with a quote from Rumi. Dude. And then this thought-provoking post that goes on forever. No one is going to read that. You just spent whatever time it took to write 500 words for nothing, because not one person who follows you is going to take the time to read that.
Yeah, that's it. It's getting so bad, and even like it's trending. Even like, for example, now what's in even on the Instagram Reels, they're looking to push those videos that last 15 seconds.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. Like 1 minute is too long now.
It takes everything I have to be able to like give a message that's all half decent in 60 seconds. 15 seconds, I mean, that's not even a sentence, but that's where people get their, I mean, that's the attention span of kids nowadays.
You know, I always wonder, how impactful is any information you come across on Instagram? And here's what I mean. Because if it's a 60-second clip that I saw last week, am I even going to remember that I saw that? Am I really getting anything out of it? Versus I took the time to read an article that's 2,000 words. I may have gone back and reread it, because I used to do that too. I used to reread your articles all the time. I would skim through it and I'd be like, okay, I think I got the gist of what he's talking about. Then I would go back and really dissect it and think about it and sit around and go, okay, I like some of those ideas. How am I going to implement this? So there was some real thought-provoking going on here.
Yeah, and thought-provoking is the right word. I remember I was presenting in Amsterdam, and we were, the guy who hired me was a follower of Charles. Okay, and Charles was a good friend of mine, and he was my original mentor, but he wasn't right on everything, right?
Of course not.
And he ended up like being wrong on many things, and that's something I told the organizer and said, yeah, but at least Charles made me think, and because Charles, his shtick was to give you just enough information that you want to buy more from him.
That's true.
It will tell you that, for example, the best time to train is 3 or 11 hours after you wake up. Then you ask him, well, why? He said, well, it's a neurological phenomenon. Well, no shit, but what is the? So he wouldn't tell you. But I would actually went out and researched it. And that's what we did back then. If we didn't get the full answer, at least it would trigger curiosity, and we go search for it. Yeah. Now people don't search for stuff. They don't search for stuff. So that's why I think that training is not complicated, but people still find a way to oversimplify it. Right. Like they latch into big concepts that are pretty true, but need some context. For example, let's say that now the popular thing in nutrition is calories in versus calories out. So that is probably the main factor in losing or gaining fat, if you're in a surplus or deficit. But that's not the only factor. I mean, the body is not an open like system. It's like there's tons of stuff going on, and there's a lot of hormonal stuff that impact metabolic rate. So, for example, even if you believe in the calories in versus calories out, insulin sensitivity can influence metabolic rate, because when insulin is high, your metabolic slow down. When it's low, it speeds up. New research shows that. So if you have like a type 1 diabetic, they're skinny as a rail. The moment you put them on insulin, they blow up at the same caloric intake, right? So people who produce more insulin, okay, will have a slower metabolic rate. So that does not go against the calories in versus calories out. There's just less calories out. Yeah. It's harder to be in a deficit. And we can talk about cortisol's impact on thyroid, right? Yeah. Which will slow down cortisol. But people latch onto that. All thing that matters is calories in versus calories out.
Like, it doesn't matter what those calories consist of. So for example, you could have two people that 2,000 calories, let's say, is the same deficit for these two individuals, but one person is getting it from clean foods, while the other person is just eating whatever they want to, as long as it stays within the confines of those 2,000 calories. So it could be a Snickers bar, it could be ice cream, it could be Kool-Aid. You know, you can't tell me that those two people are going to get the same results. It's absurd. This whole calories in, calories out. Like, it doesn't matter as long as you stay below this. And also, I mean, that the cleaner you eat, the less room there is for junk food too. Because if you're going, okay, I can only eat 2,000 calories, and you focus on all the clean foods first, you've already hit your 2,000 calorie mark. As opposed to, you focus on 2,000 calories, it doesn't matter what it is. You may not eat anything healthy because you're thinking all I have to do is stay below 2,000.
You know, and you know what? It might be shocking, but you know what? Health matters. It's like one thing. Like, being big might not, or being shredded might not be the most important thing ever. Like, being healthy is actually more important. And if you're healthier, your body functions better. You're gonna build muscle and lose fat easier. You have less systemic inflammation, dude. And when you say that to people, science doesn't say that. The science doesn't agree. You know what? Calories in versus calories out is a very good entry level model for a sedentary person.
Right.
Because who typically eats the traditional North American diet. So if you just go from traditional North American diet at 4,000 calories a day, and you go to traditional Western diet at 2,000 calories, guess what? You're gonna lose weight. Yeah. It's gonna feel like shit, but it works.
At least it's less garbage that you're taking in.
That's it.
You went from more garbage to less garbage, which is a step. It's still garbage, but it's a step in the right direction.
Exactly, but that's entry level.
Yeah.
And yes, it's necessary to have a deficit to lose fat optimally, but it's not the only factor.
Right. The health thing is important. I feel like that's something that is not promulgated, to say the least, on something like social media, because it's all about aesthetics there. So you could have someone who has a 12-pack, but they're taking 5 energy drinks to get through the day, and they're not eating anything remotely healthy because they're just consuming so little. So they're barely getting any nutrition, I should say. So aesthetically, they look, oh, wow, that's what I want to look like. But when you look at what they're doing to get themselves there, how much they're depleting themselves, it's not, first of all, you can't sustain that. And the longer you sustain it, the worse it is for your health. So it's just a wrong focus, to say the least.
No, it's very easy to look happy for a 15 seconds clip.
And I think that's the other thing that hurts a lot of people, because a lot of people who deal with depression, and they go on Instagram and they see all these happy people. Everybody's smiling. Everybody loves each other. Everybody's doing fun stuff. They're out hiking. They're on a vacation in Vegas. They're going skydiving, parasailing, whatever. And you're thinking, man, my life sucks. I hate my job. I don't have anyone around me. It's like everyone else is having fun out there except me. You start thinking like that.
Yeah, and even with lifting, right? Because if you love lifting, okay, who are you gonna follow? The big names, right? And so you see day after day after day, 800 pound squats, 700 pound deadlift, 500 pound bench press. And you know what? Suddenly your 550 deadlift, your 450 squat, and your 350 bench don't like look that good. So, right. And then you see women bench pressing more than you bench. And then you forget, well, these are like the elite of the elite.
Exactly.
It's not reality. I mean, they are people. I mean, among normal people, you're still one of the very best.
Right.
So, but it plays a mind fuck with you.
Yeah, you may be one of the strongest guys in your gym, and maybe you may deadlift 400 pounds, and people start looking, just because that's a real world environment. And most gyms don't have a strong contingent of, most gyms are not elite powerlifters. They tend to go to certain places. So it's kind of the opposite of the way it used to be. Now in the context of your gym, you're actually strong, but you don't appreciate that feedback, because when you go online, your strength comparatively is weak. Where when I first started working out, no one, the only people that knew what you could do were people in your gym, unless you competed. And even then, how much was that publicized? So you might read Powerlifting USA and you see some names, but you didn't even see pictures or videos or anything. So it didn't really have the same impact.
And the problem with that is that, you know, it changes the expectation of what can be achieved. So
Right.
let's say someone trains hard for 3 months, they bring their deadlift from 315 to 405.
Yeah.
Which you would agree is an amazing way, like
absolutely
tremendous progress for 3 months, crazy progress. But now, because they are seeing all these 800-pound deadlift, it's still like half of what these guys are doing. So my program must not work. I need to find a better program because I'm only deadlifting 405. They don't see the 100-pound improvement that they made, which is fucking awesome. Okay, so they see there must be something wrong with my program, or there must be something wrong with my supplements. So they go to dark side because, well, that's problem. My training is not working. I mean, their unrealistic expectations lead to bad decisions in training.
Some people get that with hormone optimization stuff, where, for example, they go, man, I can't wait to get my testosterone checked. My sex drive is through the roof. My workouts are great. I feel amazing. I'm on top of things. And then they get disappointed by the number. They're like, man, my total testosterone was only 650. I thought it was going to be 900. And my free was only 100. I thought it was going to be 200 at the top of the scale. So now all of a sudden they're disappointed. I go, but wait a minute. Why did you care about improving this particular hormone? Because you wanted all the things that you're actually benefiting from now. So who cares what the number is? The number could be 450, but if you feel that way, who cares? Or the number could be, I know people, the number is 900 and they still feel like shit.
But it's not just a matter of level. I mean, there's a thing called receptor sensitivity.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So, I mean, number, and you know, the worst part is, right? You have that guy who super sex drive, making progress in the gym, looking better, think his testosterone is 700 and it's 450. Now what happened? Sex drive goes down.
Exactly.
Just because mentally he think I have low testosterone, so he just like psych himself out.
Yeah, exactly. So I think but the only reason you're comparing your numbers to someone else is because a lot of other people are posting their numbers. Otherwise, you may not even know what other people are at. Yeah. Going, hey guys, just got my blood work done. Here's where I'm at. And you go, well, wait a minute, how come that person's numbers are way better than mine? Even though that person may feel like shit, that they may have numbers that look good for someone who doesn't really understand how to analyze these things. Because really good doctors, they treat your symptoms more than numbers on a page.
That's it.
It's what matters most is how are you actually feeling.
It's scary how many doctors don't know how to properly interpret blood work.
Oh, it's distressing, honestly.
Dude, I've had a client. She was diagnosed hypothyroid, right? Her T3 was low. She had symptoms of hypothyroidism. Her T4 was high. TSH was normal. What did the doctor do? Give him T4. Which is the normal. When you have hypothyroidism, you go with T4. But she already had high T4. The problem was she was not converting it to T3 because of excess cortisol.
Right.
And that's just read the damn blood work. I mean, you have excess T4. Why give her T4? It just further inhibited TSH.
My brother is a really technical guy. He learned how to fix every car problem you can imagine on his own, just reading a manual. So he says whenever he goes to a car repair place, he's never intimidated because he knows the bullshit when they say it. When they try to inflate, he knows what the real cost is and how much work they're going to have to put in. So he has a lot of confidence going into places like that. But a more important confidence to have is going to the doctor's office, because I am not remotely intimidated by doctors. Because I know most of them don't know jack shit about nutrition, and very few know anything about hormones. All they do is look at a page. If everything falls within statistical ranges, forget about normal range. It's a statistical range. As long as it falls within that, they think you're fine. They could care less. So I only go to doctors that, like a good friend of mine, Dr. Julio Garcia, he's basically my primary physician because he understands anti-aging and hormone optimization at a very high level. Why would I want to go pay to get bad advice from someone who doesn't even know as much as I do? But the point is that this stuff is so important to know that the last thing you want to be is that guy going to a doctor who has no clue about any of this stuff. And then you're just relying on that physician to point you in the right direction. You better have the right doctor. You better make sure that's the right doctor, because you're putting way too much power in someone else's hand over your health. Another car, you can buy another car, you can get another house, you can get different clothes. But someone screws up your physiology, screws up your body, you may not be able to come back from that if they really screw it up.
100%.
Well, cool. Do you need to go right now?
Yeah, my kid just came back from
I wanted to cut that off. So maybe another time we'll talk about the branched chain aminos and the essential amino acids. But basically, what I was going to ask you about, you've already conveyed very well in your article. So I'll just put that in the show notes as well. So where can people find out more about you?
Well, just anywhere you want to go, just type Thibaudeau, you're going to find it.
Yeah.
That's like the extent of the amount of publicity I'm comfortable doing.
All right, sounds good. Well, hey man, pleasure as always. I appreciate talking to you. You're always a breath of fresh air and so knowledgeable, and you're very consistent. You don't get pulled in different directions of nonsense. So I always appreciate that about you.
Appreciate that. And by the way, good luck with your dog.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, man.